The Taiping Rebellion is not only one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, with around 20 million deaths. It was a remarkably all-rounded religious, political and social movement which exposed the decaying Qing Empire and sowed the seed of future rebellions which would dismantle it completely without beating around the bush. We will begin with social mobility. Dissatisfaction was Confucianism and the spread of Christianity amongst the wider populace to be the ground upon which the Taiping Rebellion fermented and reached its point of eruption. Social immobility exists when the system of social, political and economic classes doesn't allow lateral movement. Whilst such a system is pleasant and useful to the ruling elite, aristocracy and wealthy tradesmen, it has a devastating effect on the downtrodden lower classes, who can either grit their teeth and accept fate in a defeatist manner, relying on each other, without challenging the system, or they can confront the system by opting out of it and by picking up arms against it. The latter happened with the Taiping Rebellion. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we must explain why Confucianism failed the people, especially when it gives precedence to meritocratic setups. It's because this was not the case in practice. The population had multiplied beyond the jobs and prospects the market could supply. On top of that, the privileged class had greater access to resources, which allowed them to pass the extremely difficult government examinations which determined one's future. The poor peasants were overtaxed and forced to flee their lands. Xiuquan was a promising lad and much of his village folks put together their resources and efforts to make sure he could pass the civil service examination and prove advantageous for his small community. It was very important to have connections to officials in powerful positions, as there wasn't anybody which held lower officials accountable for their failure to perform their duties. Given the fact Xiuquan failed his examinations 4 times, he must have felt powerless and disappointed in being a letdown. It's known that around this period of his life, he experienced certain visions in which Confucianism was reduced to idol worship and condemned. Given the fact Xiuquan didn't mind mixing local Chinese customs with his newfound distaste for Confucianism, it had more to do with the bureaucratic political institutions it promoted, rather than the religious or cultural customs. In the midst of all this, Christianity was in the air. With more and more locals being influenced by evangelical missionaries from the West, people's minds were looking for a new religion and social cultural system that could overthrow the archaic Confucianism and fulfill their needs. These 3 factors mentioned above created the atmosphere for the Taiping Rebellion, but they don't tell the whole story, and much more needs to be said on the dire conditions of people in terms of socio-economic instability. Continuing where we left, we need to supplement social immobility with social instability to make sense of the Taiping Rebellion. As mentioned earlier, this rebellion has come to be regarded as a proto-socialist revolution by the Communist Party, given the socialist-esque land, economic and gender reforms Xiuquan instituted. It's not difficult to see why this perspective has some validity to it. The Qing Empire was disintegrating from within and without. In utter military humiliation, it had lost the First Opium War, in consequence of which, there was a great trade imbalance created by the import of large-scale illegal narcotics. To make matters worse, the empire was hit by a series of famines and other natural disasters which pushed people to adopt desperate means to survive. Banditry was a common phenomenon and the government could not do much to put an end to it. This led to the formation of many secret societies, which aimed to protect the business and other interests of its members via extrajudicial means. These societies are now commonly known as the triads. They have their own secret symbols, rituals and principles. The Taiping Rebellion developed in 3 phases. At first, it was just a bunch of vigilante groups taking law into their own hands to deal with bandits. Then it developed into a guerrilla warfare after the small movement was suppressed by Qing authorities. In its final stage, it turned into a civil war with 1 million rebels. It's important to not confuse the triads with the rebels who were devoted to the cause of the Heavenly Kingdom. The 2 groups fell apart after the capture of Nanjing. The Taiping Rebellion had an ethnic characteristic to it, in that it was an anti-Manchus movement. The Manchus belonged to the ruling elite, Qing Empire. They were seen as corrupt, greedy, prejudiced and killed mercilessly. Nevertheless, it's important to not be overtaken by this proto-socialist ethnocentric depiction of Taiping Rebellion. As the adage goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. This was no different when it comes to Xiuquan. After gaining power, he neglected his responsibilities and indulged in the same hedonistic passions which he had condemned in the Qing Emperor. He became a ruthless dictator and issued fanatical laws, such as gender segregation, even for couples. Like many despots, he was very paranoid of any subordinate who dared to challenge his bizarre rulings and dictates. A prime example would be the case in which he ordered the slaughtering Yang's followers, who he had earlier established as the spokesperson of God. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was originally meant to be an utopia, akin to the Heavenly Kingdom promised in the Bible. But as time progressed, Hong almost lost contact with reality and was surrounded by enemy forces from all corners. Even in his own eyes, he saw himself as a hero become the very villains he despised. No depiction of the Taiping rebellion and its heavenly kingdom is complete without a description of its religious element. If we could give a name to the religious ideology which inspired the Taiping rebellion, it would be best named Christian millennialism with local Chinese indigenous characteristics, whilst history is not the product of great man primarily. With their absence, it would be altered significantly. The same can be said of Hong Xiuquan. Someone like Jung would describe Hong's dreams and visions as the unveiling of the collective psyche. Most see him as a madman. But whether he was truly inspired by God or deluded, or both, is beyond the capacity of historical studies, but we do know he suffered a nervous breakdown after failing his exam the third time. This gave rise to a series of visions in which he saw himself as the brother of Jesus and was commanded to get rid of Confucianism and demon worship present in China. Recalling the title L suggested for his religious ideology, millennialism is any movement which believes a heavenly kingdom will be established on earth prior to the day of judgment, with the forces of good finally defeating evil once and for all. Hong Xiuquan was no priest or scholar of the Bible. He became acquainted with Christianity after reading a pamphlet. Later on, he did manage to get hold of a Bible, but the translation was far from correct and could be easily misinterpreted. He was especially interested in the book of Revelation, which describes the end of times and the doomsday. As mentioned earlier, he added local Chinese elements to his new religion by editing the Bible as he saw fit for his cause and situation, such as including gender equality and donations to the local commune in the divine imperatives. In other words, his movement was syncretic and he had no qualms about abandoning the common priests who refused to recognize him as an authentic Christian. Whilst it's nearly impossible to judge whether Hong Xiuquan really believed in what he preached or whether he was using Christianity to advance his political cause, he issued many commands and rulings which were primarily based on his new religious movement. The most famous of which is when the food supply was on shortage, he commanded his followers to eat manna, and did so himself, a heavenly food which was awarded to the Israelites. Not only that, it's very probable that he died from stomach indigestion caused by the manna, weeds, he consumed. To conclude this video, we can say the Taiping rebellion was pure chaos, triggered by a network of religious, political, economic and social forces. Similarly, we can find a good, bad and ugly side to Hong Xiuquan, the Taiping